My brother, Simon Bailey, was a vicar. He was gay and he had AIDS. He died 20 years ago this month. He wrote a book called The Well Within, Parables for Living and Dying. The first section of the book is called Living in the Face of Dying, and I'm going to read some extracts from it. It was Remembrance Day, 11th November 1985. I had been on retreat in Durham and returned home. I never unpack my bags before I've looked through the post, and so, sitting among the luggage, I found a letter from the hospital. I had been undergoing tests to discover why my blood took so long to clot. The letter simply said I needed to contact the hospital urgently. It was as vague as that, but I knew. I hadn't really thought about it seriously until then, but somehow I knew. The dread, even then in 1985, of every gay man. HTLV3, as they called it then, the HIV virus that leads to AIDS. I knew very little about it, neither really did anyone else, but it hovered already, rightly or wrongly, as the great fear of the gay community. And now they were going to tell me it was there in my blood. My journal says, and after that to return home to the sudden possibility, I don't think I'm being melodramatic, of death. I'm terribly self-conscious, self-aware, febrile, shaking. And the lust to live is incredibly strong, an angry strength. I have just too much, too many people to live for. I danced on my own, in amongst the luggage and the other unopened mail. I put on a favourite record and danced. I keep dancing, says the journal, a kind of frenzy, the liveliest thing I can do. The diagnosis was confirmed a week later at the hospital, and I, fit and healthy and well, found myself from then on living in the face of dying. I do things, say the journal, and suddenly something sinks away, the possibility, it yawns and gapes, an abyss. I felt, of course, as someone who tries to pray, that I ought to be able to face this, at least to begin to try, but the constant image from those first years living with the virus is of a brick wall, an impenetrable wilderness. I might frequently return to face the question, but for so long it was simply facing a wall, staring into nothing at all. And I realise now that in many ways my brick wall was partly to do with refusing to accept affliction, denying it, and being afraid. Affliction pushes the fundamental questions of spirituality. Who really am I? What do I really want? Where am I really going? What am I afraid of? There are words in this book, in Simon's writing, that I have returned to time and time again, always from a different place on my own spiritual journey. Simon's journey from HIV to AIDS, from health to terrible sickness, was also a deep spiritual journey. Those questions he was posing gave him the depth of will to live in the face of dying. The questions identified 4 elements: identity, desire, destiny, and dignity. Simon responded to those in this way: I am a person in my own right, not merely dependent on others. I can stand up straight and be myself with others, without self-centeredness or arrogance, but in quiet assurance and integrity. From such a stance, I can begin to love unselfishly and without possessiveness. And a particular passage which speaks to me so loudly: there is nothing I need to fear, in myself or from the world. I can live in dignity, with courage, and face whatever seems to threaten. I am not in isolation from the world, alone and fearful, but can share love with others and discover the love that streams in the universe. If I acknowledge the profound dignity of every human being, however sometimes distorted, then I affirm my own dignity too, and enter a world without fear or loneliness. For me, on my journey, these words speak to me of living from the heart. This has become a mantra for me, and I believe that it is about having courage, having dignity, and indeed acknowledging the profound dignity of every human being. So many people drew so much from Simon's story, his living and his dying. In the last 3 years of Simon's life, he was very, very ill, and he was on total parenteral nutrition, which was fed to him through a Hickman's line directly into his heart. The hospital told him he would have to come in every week for 3 nights to have his treatment, and Simon refused. He said, "No, I am a vicar, I have work to do." So he was invited to consider asking his church to help him. And that's exactly what he did. He asked for help, and 30 people came forward, including my mother, and they supported Simon by staying with him for 3 nights every week on a rota for 3 years. It was a courageous, unselfish and compassionate thing to do. In 1995, the year that Simon died, he made a programme for the BBC Everyman. It was a video diary. It brought hundreds of letters of courage, of gratitude and of recognition of Simon's life and of the fact that we are all living in the face of dying. And we can all do that with courage, with dignity, and with love. The last few lines of this passage that I want to read to you tell us so much about the journey that Simon was on. He says, "The journey doesn't end, but once begun, it becomes a kind of hunger, a longing that is hard to suppress, so that it feels like standing up straight in sunlight after being crouched, cramped in a low, dark tunnel."